We are obsessed with tracking every headline around Goldman. Part of this is because the industry also looks at Goldman as kind of setting the tone, setting the bar. Why is that? Why does Goldman even operationally kind of set the tone for everyone else on Wall Street?
You know, because, Scarlett, it's been the best investment bank on Wall Street for really decades now. I mean, it really has become the bellwether firm on Wall Street. It's the one other banks compare themselves to. It's the one other banks would like to emulate if they possibly can. I mean, which is interesting because in really like the last 10 years, there's been a dramatic shift on Wall Street in terms of where the power base is. Obviously, JP Morgan Chase is the biggest bank. It's got the biggest market value. It's got the biggest market share. It's got unbelievable profitability that kind of blows Goldman away. Even Goldman's longtime rival, Morgan Stanley, now has a bigger market value consistently by 30 to 40 billion than Goldman Sachs. But Goldman Sachs continues to generally be number one in M&A, number one in underwriting, and of course every other bank wants to be. I mean, what an incredible brand, and they want to be like Goldman Sachs.
They want to be like Goldman Sachs, but even still, the Palace intrigue has been pretty incredible to watch over the past couple weeks and months. Why haven't we heard directly from the board? We know that there was a Financial Times report over the weekend reporting that David Solomon has the support of the board, but why haven't we heard more forcefully from the board at this point?
You know, that is the million-dollar question. You know, the board, their silence is really starting to get deafening. It makes no sense. Either you support David or you don't support David at this point. If you support David, come out and say you do. If you don't support David, then, all right, let's face that hard fact and let's move on to somebody else. Because the headlines and the continued drumbeat of negative stories about David's reign, as you pointed out at the top of the show, it's not about the stock price, which once upon a time, of course, used to be the only thing that mattered, you know, but now other things matter. Morale matters, his affect with people inside the firm, how he comes across. These things all matter now, and the board needs to step up, stop hiding, and come out and say whether or not it supports David Solomon right now.
And Sri, come in on that, because correct me if I'm wrong, but Solomon is the chairman of the board, correct? So, I mean, how would that really work?
He's chairman of the board, but still it's a large board. You do have a lead independent director who's, who's no stranger to finance. He used to run the investment bank at Credit Suisse by Ogun Lacey. So if there is enough dissatisfaction on the board, of course they can move against the CEO. But it is also very important to recognize that doesn't happen easily. Boards don't make these decisions easily, especially at a firm like Goldman Sachs, which we all have to acknowledge has not had bad performance. It's not being run into the ground. The question that a lot of the partners there are asking is David Solomon additive to the Goldman value, or is he subtracting from the value? Some of the people who are dissatisfied, if that's a mild way to put it, would like to point out that they actually think that he's taking away from some of the value, because where they have had successes, they've really been strong at it for years on end, trading and investment banking. But some of the mishaps, some of the misadventures have been part of the strategy retooling that has taken place under David Solomon, that has expanded under David Solomon. They've tried to do away with a lot of it, but it has taken them 5 years to get to a point where the strategy now looks like something that all investors embrace. But we've wasted 4 to 5 years there. So arguably, the stock could have done way better if you didn't have some of those misadventures.
And that reversal strategy led to some charges, which led to smaller bonuses, which also makes people unhappy. So I'm going to put that question to you, Bill, that Sri posed. Is David Solomon additive to Goldman Sachs and everything it represents, or is he subtracting value? And again, we're not just talking about the stock price anymore, but everything else.
Well, Scarlett, you know, I know David pretty well. I mean, I think in many ways he's a very strong leader for the firm. But I will tell you what's become a negative is really, since the beginning of the year, the drumbeat of negative stories, really I think starting with a cover story in The Economist, with a bookend of The Economist, I think yesterday, in fact, an op-ed, an editorial, basically, essentially calling for David, I think, to resign, or the board to replace him. That's the way I read that. I think all these stories, ones I've written, ones Bloomberg has written, New York Magazine, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, all of them, the drumbeat is really becoming a problem, and they have to figure out a way to get beyond this.
Bill, do you think Goldman Sachs is still the same firm it was in the wake of the financial crisis? I mean, I go back to the Vampire Squid days, its successes that resulted in The Big Short being written, Lloyd Blankfein's quote about doing God's work. All the banks have kind of morphed or evolved a little bit after the financial crisis. Has Goldman?
I mean, none of the banks are what they were before the financial crisis, and that's by design, Scarlett. I mean, that is absolutely what Dodd-Frank is trying to prevent. A lot of what the banks used to do is now moved into the shadow banking market, and so that's a big place where risk has moved. So it's a very different Wall Street than it was before. But again, Goldman Sachs is still a worldwide leader in investment banking, and that is, frankly, the most profitable and most enviable part of banking to this day. So it's not something that they can't overcome, but they need to figure out a way to get out of the headlines, and fast.
So let me ask you this, Bill, because it's very clear that as what we can see, you've been speaking to a lot of people, I've been speaking to a lot of people, there is no indication that the board is eager to move. There is no indication that they want to oust David Solomon. The question then becomes, does he win over these disgruntled executives, or does this drumbeat continue? Because yes, there have been a lot of media stories, but they've not been pulled out of thin air. This is what we are hearing from inside the House. If there is no change, which looks like the likely scenario, unless some other new fact emerges, unless there is another screw-up, which there may well not be, and they could possibly be on this redemption journey over the next couple of years, do you get in a position where you can win back these executives? Can David Solomon pull that off?
It's a great question, Sri. And investment bankers are actually pretty simple. If their bonuses go up in 2023 from 2022, a lot of this rumbling, I think, dies down. To me, it comes down to this third quarter, because so much was thrown into the second quarter. All the kitchen sink material was thrown into the second quarter. If this third quarter isn't better, and now we're about halfway through it, then David's job really could be in jeopardy. But I think if they get through the third quarter and everything sort of stabilizes, and they sell off the pieces they want to sell off, and they take their write-downs, and bonuses are up, and they don't have these losses that they had in the consumer business that they did have, and if the board can get itself out of its own way and come out in support of David, I think this can all begin to die down.